Hello and welcome.
That if I say something stupid, you can always edit it out, right?
But we don't actually edit anything.
Oh, okay.
Unless you want, unless you say something, you reveal something you don't want to reveal, or so with that said, welcome back to the show. Desiree Dorion is with us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And we have a mutual friend. Well, I guess we probably have lots, but Rhonda Head.
Yeah. She's the one
Rhonda.
that introduced me to you and you to me. Yeah.
Great. And you guys have both been in Toronto, just tearing up the town and doing all that kind of stuff.
I wish I could say that were true, but no. I've been here all week doing a bunch of co-writes and collaborating.
Excellent, because you just released a new record.
I did, February 24th.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Why don't we start there? Why don't you tell us about the record? I was just listening to it while we were setting up the studio here. Love the tracks.
Oh, thank you.
And I see it was produced by Chris Burke-Gaffney.
Yeah.
Who I'm familiar with, and I think a lot of people are familiar with as well.
Yeah.
So how did that record start, and how did that all process come together?
Well, it was very organic. And it wasn't necessarily intentional. I had released an album in February of 2020 called Break the Chain. And of course, as we all know, the pandemic hit in March of 2020. So I had a big, moment of like self-pity shortly after that, because I had a bunch of shows and things lined up for that project that of course never came to fruition. And nowadays, as you know, music consumers consume music a lot more quickly than they used to. When I first started releasing albums, it used to be the case that we'd get, 2 years out of an album cycle.
At least 18 months, if not 2 years. That's right.
And now that's like so far from the truth anymore. So I released this album in February of 2020, and of course the pandemic hit, and I thought, okay, like everything is canceled now. And so come February the following year, so a year later, I knew that like I wasn't going to get any traction out of that album. Like it was just basically like, get over it, it's done.
Right.
So then I released a song called Sometimes I Drink, and I released that in May of 21. And I don't know how or what what happened, but it ended up, going to, I think number one on iTunes in the first week of release in Canada. And just did like really well for me. And actually there was a moment in Manitoba where all of the restrictions lifted and I was actually able to work because of that single from June until about December. So it actually like kept me working, which I was so thankful for. And so I actually had like a lot of work in the back end of the pandemic because of that song. But it was because of the album that flunked, that flopped, that was the catalyst to this new single. Right. And so after that, I knew, okay, well, I have to follow that up with something. And so I did a duet with Dave Wasloo from Doc Walker. And we released Wouldn't That Be Fun? And that song did fairly well for me as well. And then again, like now I'm thinking, okay, well, I've got to build off this momentum that I'm seeing. So I released a song called Your Last Name, and that was my highest streamed single until my current single. So that said, I released these 3 singles, and I thought, well, I've got three songs produced. I might as well put that together in an album, right? And so that is how this album actually came to be.
Okay. So during the pandemic, I guess, like you said, and a lot of musicians we've talked to, they found a lot of that sort of lockdown time give them the creative time they needed, because they didn't have to go to that 9-to-5 job, and they didn't have these other responsibilities except stay away from other people. Yeah. Did you find that an overly productive time for yourself, or did you struggle like some artists? They just couldn't get into the I guess the vibe or the groove of writing.
I mean, I think I was really fortunate because I had released Sometimes I Drink, and then there was a window of opportunity in Manitoba where the restrictions had lifted, and so I was working really hard. Like I was doing outdoor things where, you know, you could have a certain number of people at. So like I was playing live in certain instances. I picked up a bunch of online work that was, you know, I mean, it wasn't ideal, but it was what it was. And we all just kind of accepted it. Like for me, work was work. I did a little bit of collaborating, but because I was so busy, I didn't have a whole bunch of time to do much co-writing. Right. So the songs on this album are actually songs that I had in the can already, that I had written in January of 2020, also pre-pandemic. So I went down to New Orleans for Folk Alliance International.
Oh, okay.
Played a bunch of showcases in January 2020 there. Rented a car. But my last showcase actually was at 2:45 in the morning.
Oh.
On Sunday.
At FAI.
Yeah.
I think we were at that one, actually. Maybe not that specific showcase, but we were at that conference. So maybe we did see you.
Maybe.
It was so many years ago. Everything's a haze now.
I know. Everyone wants to forget those years also, too, right? Like, it's like, ugh. But yeah, no, so I rented a car and I drove north to Nashville. And I spent a week there after FAI doing a bunch of co-writing and stuff. So I had already a bunch of these songs, and that's where all of these songs on this album came from.
Great.
So.
And I see you did some co-writing with Crystal Shawanda.
Yeah. She's the one that I co-wrote Sometimes I Drink with.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that co-written in Nashville or?
In Nashville.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. It was really cool, actually, because Crystal's obviously had like a massive amount of success, and she's somebody that, you know, as an Indigenous woman, I've looked up to. We're about the same age, so, you know, when I was seeing her on CMT, I was thinking like, wow, like there's a brown woman on CMT. What the hell is going on here, you know? But she was somebody that I just really admired and looked up to. And so when I reached out to her, I honestly kind of half-heartedly thought, she's probably going to say no. She's probably going to say that she's got other commitments and other things going on, but that'll be like her way of letting me down gently.
Right.
But she was like, yeah, absolutely. I actually am home in January, like, which is crazy because she tours all the time.
That's right.
And she says, I'm going to be home. Let's book this day. And so I showed up to her house and that right after FAI. And yeah, I met her hubby and her little baby girl. And we went up and wrote Sometimes I Drink in her home studio.
Awesome. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So working with Chris Burke-Gaffney, what's the process there? Do you have like, I have an idea for a song and then you bring it to him, or is there a collaboration in that process as well? Or
it depends. Chris and I have done a lot of co-writing together over the years. So I've released many songs that we've co-written together. But sometimes, you know, like Sometimes I Drink, I'll take that to Chris and say like, hey, this is a song that I wrote with Crystal. I want you to produce it. And he'll just, you know, start laying down the tracks and stuff for it. And then we'll get it in like kind of a demo fashion. And lately he's been working with a studio out of Nashville. And so a lot of the guys that are like the bass solo section in Sometimes I Drink, I said I wanted that to sound like there's a bass solo in Miranda Lambert's Little Red Wagon. I said I want it to sound like that. So Chris is doing his thing and he sends it down to his contact in Nashville, and he says, you know, she wants this bass solo to sound like this. And the producer in Nashville says, well, no way. We've got that same bass player in session today. Wow. So Miranda's bass player is actually playing on Sometimes I Drink.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like funny little things that have been happening to me in the last like 2 years, where it's kind of almost like serendipitous. Yeah.
Right. It was like, it was meant to be. The universe wanted you to have this sort of...
have that song. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think of songs like gifts, and every now and again you just get this little special gift, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't know. I really do think it comes from, you know, a higher being, a higher power, but you know, you never know when you're going to get it or if you're going to get another one.
Okay, that's true. That's true. So would you say songwriting comes easy to you then, or you're waiting for that inspiration to pop in your brain?
I'd say sometimes it's a bit of both. Like, it really depends. I do a lot of driving, and so when I'm on the road, I will... I mean, you have nothing but time. And so I'm a thinker, and I think all the time if I'm driving, and I'll look out the, you know, and I'm also kind of a bit ADD. Like I have a scatterbrain. And so I'll look out the window and I'll be like, oh, look at that. And, the other day, I've been here all week co-writing, and I wrote a song on Monday with Stacey and Shane Guzet from Western Swing. And I brought this idea to them because I was on the road and I stopped to use the bathroom. And I was sitting down in the stall and I'm looking around and there's like writing all over the wall in the bathroom stall.
As there usually is.
Yeah. And I was sitting there like doing my thing and I'm like, man, like this is kind of like a sacred space. Like people are revealing really personal things. And some of it is really mundane. Like some of it's like, for a good time call. Some of it's, Sheila's a...
Sure.
And all of that kind of stuff. But some of it's really prolific and some of it's really deep and heavy. And I was just kind of sitting there and I'm thinking like this place that I'm in is kind of like the keeper of secrets right now. And so we wrote that song on Monday. And so like it just really depends for me where I am and maybe even what kind of mood I'm in. Like sometimes I write better when I'm really, really tired. Right. Because you're just, I don't know, you're more open, more vulnerable, more emotional maybe. And but it just kind of depends, I think, on the day.
Okay. Well, I guess, everyone's got a different process.
Yeah.
For myself, same way. I mean, sometimes you're inspired by events that happen in the world, and sometimes you just have an idea for a cool riff, and you build a song behind that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess getting to live performances, you've done your share of playing live.
Yeah.
And what was your first experience on the stage, and how old were you when you first decided you wanted to become a professional singer?
Well, I have no shame in saying this. I turned 40 this year. And the very, very first time I set foot on stage, I started out actually by writing. So when I remember writing as young as 5 years old and having little diaries and writing down little ideas, and none of them were very good, but like that was already something that was being cultivated. And when I was 8 years old, I wrote a Christmas song and I shared it with my music teacher. I had the best music teacher in the world, Mrs. Schmidt was her name. And I shared it with her and I couldn't ever play an instrument. So I just sang her the melody that I had in my head and the lyrics. And she put the piano to it and she said, you're going to sing this at the Christmas concert. And I remember getting to the concert and it was my turn to go up. And I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't. And I started having a massive anxiety attack. And she goes, nope, get up there. We learned it. You know it. Do it. I was like, so I got up and I was like this little kid and I was terrified. And I never sang again until I was about 12. I was in Opaskwayak, which is my First Nation community. And I have an aunt there that I would go and had an aunt. She's her name's Diane DeChambeau. She passed away a number of years ago, and I'd go and spend a week or 2 weeks with her. And usually I would try and time it around what they used to call their Indian days, but now it's Indigenous days. And they of course always had a talent show, and so she knew already at that point because I was always like I'd be humming around the house and singing little songs to myself, and so my aunt and members of my family knew I could sing, but nobody else knew that I had a voice. It was always just like, no, I'm just a writer. I just like to write poems. It
was your secret superpower.
Yeah. So she said, I'm going to sign you up for the talent show. You're going to go and do it. And I was like, I don't really want to. And she goes, no, I think you should go and do it. So she convinced me to do it, and same thing. When it was my time to get on, I was like, oh, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And she's like, get up there now. And she goes, I can't remember what she said to me exactly, but it was like, go. Like it was a swear word. And she said, go, get up there. And I did, and I won first place. And for me, that was a really pivotal moment because I was like, okay, maybe this isn't so scary after all.
Right.
And maybe people actually want to hear me sing, and that was really a moment for me where I kind of shifted and turned a corner. And so then I did like the talent show circuit in Northern Manitoba, which was huge in, Indigenous communities, and really like came up in the talent show circuit. And so, you'd go to one community, you'd win first, second, third, maybe. You'd go to the next one the following weekend, same thing. And it kind of became addictive. And then, so that was kind of That was like the first two major performances that I remember.
Okay. And then there was no holding you back since then.
There was no holding me back.
Great. So now that COVID is over, I've been talking to a lot of musicians that are about to hit the road and even trying to get shows. And there seems to be a bottleneck now of musicians out there trying to tour and releasing records, and even larger bands like Depeche Mode's back on the road, I heard, and some others. So with all these artists clamoring for a few sort of venue spots and festival spots, what do you think will happen moving forward? Do you think it'll eventually sort of work itself out and in the next year or two? Or should there be some sort of, I don't know, stimulus package for musicians? Because, Air Canada gets a stimulus package, so does Bell Media and Rogers, except there doesn't seem to be anything for us creative people. Yeah.
No, there really doesn't. And, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you're absolutely right. The live scene has shifted big time, and it's a lot harder. People are vying for, it seems like more people are vying for. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is because festivals, to their credit, have wanted to honor the agreements that they had pre-pandemic. And so, you can't fault them for that.
That's right.
And so they're also playing catch up. And so hopefully it does catch up a bit. I know the festival in my hometown this year actually hired, they have a few big names like John Fogerty's coming and Dierks Bentley and some of the bigger names in Tennille Towns in country music. But they've really had a heavy focus this year on hiring independent artists and smaller label artists and stuff. And I don't know if that was a budgetary decision or if that was a an intentional decision to put some cash back into the little guy's pocket, so to speak. But I know, I'm playing at Dauphin's Country Fest, and I'm really happy that is the approach that they took this year, because it'll help a lot of artists that are at my level and that are looking for festivals and stuff, and they're just harder to get. They're harder to get now.
Right. And would you say there's even more challenges and barriers for Indigenous artists trying to get into the music marketplace?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't know. I think that there's always going to be challenges and barriers for Indigenous artists, especially artists who are living in remote areas where internet is, connectivity is an issue. Maybe even like they don't have road access, perhaps.
Right.
And even mentorship opportunities and, access to learning about the business end of things. And there are some really great mentorship programs out there now, but it's still to a certain extent largely inaccessible for artists, particularly in the northern parts of the province or more remote areas.
Right, because I know Manitoba Music, they used to do something called Amp Camp in the past. I'm not sure if they do it anymore. But things like that I find are useful too in trying to get people into the business and educate them about how things work. Do you think there should be more of those programs, maybe specifically designed for these northern communities?
Well, actually, we just came from one. I did one 2 weeks ago with Rhonda Head, and Shanine Robinson is the program director for the
we just saw Shanine at the Canadian Folk Music Awards in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Hey, Shanine.
So she actually brought a residency specific to Opaskwayak, which is, of course, in northern Manitoba. And she did it for that reason as well, because, a lot of artists from the north are also intimidated. Like, emerging artists are intimidated. I mean, I'm from a rural community, and I've traveled all over the world, and I've been in Toronto for a week, and I've been driving on the 401 and 403 just hoping and praying that nobody's going to run me over.
Right.
So like I feel like I'm fairly well cultured, but there are still things, when you go certain places that it makes you feel like, ugh, this doesn't feel quite like home.
Right.
And so I think that a lot of it is also just that there's sometimes you're your own worst enemy, and the self-doubt and the self-deprecation and, lack of self-esteem perhaps. And I think that that's really prevalent in emerging artists, in kids in our communities.
That's right.
You know, Rhonda and I were actually having a conversation about that the other day, that when I went to university, I honestly didn't think that I could actually go anywhere other than the University of Manitoba. And so I didn't apply anywhere else because it just wasn't within my purview. It wasn't within my sense of my realm of possibility that I could go, you know, to the University of Toronto or the University of British Columbia or, you know, anywhere. It was just, okay, you got to go to Manitoba. And I think that that's, you know, speaking directly to how we talk to ourselves as Indigenous people, that, you know, we've had this oppression and we've to a certain extent accepted it.
Right.
And I think that that's still prevalent with kids that, you know, young emerging artists that I see and mentor from time to time.
Right. So it's definitely important to get to these kids and kind of show them there is a bigger world out there and with more opportunities.
Right. Yeah.
So speaking of university, you also are a practicing lawyer. So maybe tell us about that.
Don't hold that against me.
That's all right. We deal with lots of lawyers all the time. So some of them we like, some of them we don't.
Yeah.
But so how did you get on that path?
Okay, so when I graduated high school, I went and met with, like in my grade 12 year, I went and met with my guidance counselor, and I was not like a A+ student. Like I was B+ A. Okay. So I was like relatively smart, but not super smart.
Sure.
And I went and met with her, and I think maybe I had like a B on my transcript, and she goes, well, you know, I don't think you're going to be cut out for law school. Maybe you should consider something different. And so then I kind of thought, well, okay, maybe I'm like overshooting here. And so I applied in Manitoba, you have to do University 1 regardless, which is basically like grade 13.
Right.
And so you go to grade 13, University 1, and then from there you choose your faculty. So you don't have to apply to a faculty right into university. Everybody goes to University 1, and then you go to your faculty. So after University 1, I was still kind of, you know, hearing these voices in my head from this guidance counselor telling me, you know, you're not really smart enough to go to law school. Like maybe you should stay in your lane and, you know, go where you belong, because you're just not smart enough to do that. And so I applied to social work, and I got in, and I did a year in the faculty of social work, and I absolutely hated it. I hated it. It just was not cut out for me. And so I quit. I did a year and a half in the faculty of social work, and I quit. And I remember the day I phoned my mom, and I was crying, and I said, Mom, I can't do this anymore. I hate this. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know. I graduated high school when I was 17. So I was probably like 19 at this point. And like, it felt like the world was crumbling down on me. Like, how dare I not know what I want to do for the rest of my life at this age, right? And my mom's like, well, what do you mean you quit school? I said, well, I can't do it. Like, I hate it. I absolutely hate my life right now. I don't like what I'm doing. And she goes, well, you got to figure this out. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll work for a year, Mom. Like, I don't know. Like, I just need some time. And she goes, well, take a year and that's enough. And then you figure out what you're going to do. And my mom talks really fast, and she's like very, very straightforward. And so I did. So I took a year off, and I worked for a CFS agency, Child and Family Services agency, as a receptionist. And then I got a promotion within 6 months, and I was working at 19 years old as a Child and Family Services worker. So I was hired specifically for the community of Shamattawa, which is a fly-in First Nation community in northern Manitoba. It's very remote, no road access. At that time, there was no running water. And, you know, I'm 19. Like, I've got life experience at that age, but like, I don't have kids at that age. I don't know what it's like to be a parent. I don't know, you know, anything really about child behavior or you know, addictions, even really, like from a therapeutic standpoint or a clinical standpoint. And so I thought, okay, well, I mean, I've got human emotions. I can do this job, you know, like I'm a good person and I'm empathetic. And so I went up, and I would fly in for a week and I'd fly home for a week. And my husband and I were living in Winnipeg at the time. And there was one moment that I'll never ever forget, and I can't go into a whole bunch of details about it, but it was basically, I flew in and I was working with this family, and they were just so impoverished. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, this is not how people in this country should be living. Like, I don't care who you are, where you come from. this is not right. And like, these are little kids. They're little kids. Why did little kids not have access to food in one of the richest countries in the world? Food or milk or formula. And at that time, it used to be where when you removed a child from their home, when you took a child from their parents, you'd have to file a petition in court, and then you'd have to serve the parents with that petition. That's still the same. It's still the same way now. But what was happening when I was there is that we would file the petition in Thompson, which is like, I don't know, you have to fly to get there. You can't. The people in this community couldn't just drive there.
Right.
And then they would have to go to court there if they wanted to defend the removal of their children. Okay. And so I'm 19 and I'm seeing all of this and I'm thinking, like, that's not right. It isn't right. Like, if you have your kids taken away, you should have the ability to show up in court in your community and explain why your kids shouldn't be removed from your care. And so I went home after that trip and I told my husband, I said, I think I'm going to just apply to law school. Like, I think I've got to do this. And he goes, well, do it. What's the worst that they're going to say? They're going to say no. So then you figure out something else. So I said, okay. So I applied and I got in and I graduated in 2008. And I've been practicing in the area of child protection defense since that time. So yeah, that's, I worked in litigation exclusively for about 10, 11 years, I guess. And what I found is as my music started picking up a little bit, because I had court dates, it was really prohibitive for me with the music stuff. So then I was, we can cut this out if we need to, but I was drinking wine one night with a girlfriend of mine. And I said, I'm happy for it to stay in. It's fine. I don't care. But I was drinking wine with a girlfriend of mine. And I told her, I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like this litigation stuff. It's interfering with my music, and music is really where my, I love what I'm doing there. And I said, I think I'm just going to quit law and just see how it goes with music. And she goes, funny you say that. I've been feeling the same way. So I said, well, what don't you like? And she says, I hate the litigation. And she says, what don't you like? I said, well, I like the litigation. I just don't like that I can't do the music because I'm tied to these court dates. She goes, well, why don't we just open a collaborative firm where we don't go to court? And I said, well, that sounds like a good little plan. So we opened a firm in July of 2020, middle of the pandemic. Okay.
Perfect time to open a business.
Perfect timing. And you know what? It's worked out. And so now my practice has shifted from, I was doing a lot of family stuff even still at that time. I'm not really doing any family law, a whole lot of that anymore. I'm still doing the child protection defense stuff, but I've also, my practice has shifted in the sense that I'm drafting laws for First Nation communities, child welfare laws for First Nation communities who want to exercise jurisdiction of their child and family services. And so that's been really, really, really rewarding for me and really meaningful. And it's cool because I can do it almost from anywhere. So Great. It's complementary to music. Which is fantastic.
Yeah. That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's almost like the perfect sort of, setup.
It is.
Arrangement.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, my grandma is a residential school survivor and my dad is a day school survivor. And so the child protection stuff for me really is like, I call it my heart work. It's really, really meaningful work because I really do think that the child protection world that we're seeing now, I mean, in Manitoba, up until just a few years ago, over 90% of the kids in care were First Nation, Métis, or Inuit kids. And so we're still taking Indigenous kids away from their families.
Right.
And, in the same way that we saw residential school, in the same way that we saw day school, in the same way that we saw 60 Scoop, it's just a different beast.
Right.
And so I feel like this is still an extension of, of that removal of culture and that destruction of culture. And for me, it's just a meaningful way to, I think, almost achieve a full circle given where my family has come from.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you find that sometimes challenging or there's internal conflict just dealing with the legal framework of Canada and how sometimes that can be so restrictive, even when you're trying to do, positive things?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what the wait time is here in Ontario, but in Manitoba, if someone is suffering with an addiction and they want to go to treatment, their wait time is 3 to 4 months.
Oh, jeez.
And so, you know, how can you say to someone, we're going to take your kid away because you're suffering with alcoholism, and guess what? You're not going to get your kid back until you deal with that.
Right.
And then they take the child away because that's what's in the quote unquote best interest of the child, without dealing what's in, like, the best interest of the child is to be with their parent. And so, but there's no therapeutic resources available for the parent concurrently. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I mean, systemically, it's a huge problem. And, you know, I hope there's new federal legislation that was recently enacted that allows First Nation communities to negotiate kind of new deals with the feds and to draft their own laws that are complementary to those deals. And so I'm optimistic, hopefully not naively so, that maybe we'll see some positive change in that area, but it's going to take time for sure. For sure.
And do you find stories or cases that you're working on give you ideas for songs? I mean, not necessarily. You can't obviously talk about details of the case, but even just to inspire.
I mean, of course. Like, and I obviously can't, you know, reveal, you know, names or specifics about specific people. But yeah, of course. I mean, as an artist, you find inspiration where you find it, and you know, you try and honor that story in the best way that you can, I think. And so I hope that if I'm, you know, being inspired by a client of mine, that I'm honoring that story in a way that's, you know, respectful.
Right. So say you had to give one of these professions up, music or law,
God.
Which one would it be?
That's such a tough question. I don't know. I honestly don't know, because right now I feel like I have the perfect balance of both loves. It's like, I can't even think of an analogy. Like it's like asking, you know, what's your favorite chocolate bar? I don't know. Or what's your favorite ice cream? Like, if you had to give up,
that's true.
You know, it's so, yeah. And because I have the luxury of being able to do both, it just feels like, it feels like I don't have to.
Okay. I'm terrible at choosing things. Look how many guitars I own. Like I told someone I was going to sell some. Remember I was telling the guy, and I think everyone laughed. That's right. But right. Anyways. Great. So we're coming up to the end of the show, and I always ask this question of guests, and that is, what advice do you have for Indigenous sort of aspiring musicians out there, or even lawyers that are, say, living in these remote communities and maybe don't have access to high-speed internet or maybe other resources? What sort of advice do you give to them so that you can give them the right sort of steps or path to the goals that they want to achieve?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a lot of advice that I give artists. I mean, one of the things that my mom did for me as a kid that was a mistake was she bought me a karaoke machine instead of buying me a guitar and signing me up for guitar lessons. So one of the things that I always tell emerging artists is develop your musicianship. Like, play guitar, play an instrument, pick up an instrument, you know, order something on Amazon. It doesn't need to be a fancy guitar. You can get a guitar for $100. Buy a used one for $50, you know? But do whatever you can to develop that musicianship. And secondly, learn as much as you can. Don't ever think you're the smartest person in the room. You know, pick up, if you have access to internet, pick up YouTube and, you know, learn as much about marketing, as much about the business end as you can, because at the end of the day, it is a business, and, you know, you eat what you kill. And, you know, if you don't kill anything that month, then you're not eating. And so you really have to have an astute background on the business and constantly learn, because it's constantly changing, you know. When I first started, it was like digital or physical sales was all that existed. There was no such thing as digitization of music. And so you have to like be able to be flexible and evolve and learn as much as you can along the way. And that's never ending. You're always going to be learning something new. So those two things and work hard. Like it's a hard slog. You know, we're not sitting around on a day-to-day basis, and calls aren't coming in for us to, you know, go and perform here, there, and everywhere. And social media makes it look really glamorous, but it's like a lot of hard work. You know, when I walked in the studio today, I was looking like a drowned rat because there was a torrential rainpour out here. And so, you know, you got to do what you got to do to get where you need to go. And so That's just the way that it is. So work hard, learn as much as you can, and pick up an instrument.
Well, that's great advice. And it's interesting you mentioned the formats have changed because, years ago we were still selling CDs.
Yeah.
And now everything's virtual, streaming, Spotify.
Yeah.
But you only get paid like fractions of a penny.
I know.
So it's like
sad.
A lot of musicians have lost a big chunk of their income, their revenue stream. How are you and other musicians making up that difference?
Well, I mean, thankfully, Sound Exchange has helped a lot. Still live shows, like getting the live gigs and having those contracts. I mean, that definitely helps to supplement. I mean, in the rural communities, there are folks who still buy CDs. And so I always print a small number. Like I do manufacture just a small number of units because when I tour in, rural country communities, prairie towns, folks like to have a CD still. But I'm also seeing the comeback of vinyl, which is really cool. And although it's super expensive to print vinyl, and the turnaround time for vinyl is like insane. I want to say the last timeline that I heard was like 10 months or something to get a vinyl back. And so you got to plan ahead if you're going to go that route.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Do you have releases on vinyl?
No, it's on my bucket list. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it on the next release.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how are you, final question for those listening, because how are you, funding these recordings and releases? Because a lot of musicians don't have money, so they're applying to either Factor or Canada Council or whatever is in their province. I don't know if Manitoba Music has a granting. No, they don't have anything. Okay.
They have for export.
They have for export.
Not for production.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what sort of advice do you have for these musicians trying to struggle to put it together?
Well, that's also a good point, because one of the places you should be starting is looking at grant applications. And in Manitoba, we have Manitoba Music is a wonderful program. So I know when I first started, I had no idea how to put together a grant application. And in order to even do the grant application, you have to have all your other assets, right? You have to have a bio, you have to have photos that are high resolution. You have to have a marketing plan in some cases. And so, you have to learn how to put that puzzle together, basically. But start with your bio. Don't let it overwhelm you, because if you think about it all at once, it's going to be really overwhelming and frazzling. Start with your bio. Book a photographer. It doesn't even have to be anything fancy. Like sometimes now you can take better phones on iPhones than some of the fancy phones.
And Chat GPT to help write the bio if you're not a good writer.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so, start putting your assets together. Find out, like, I know Manitoba Film and Music has been a huge supporter of mine in the recent years, but it took a while to get that support. Like, it takes some work. You're not going to get yes every time you put in an application. And if there's any young people, emerging artists listening, like, I've been told far more times no than I have been told yes. And so you take the no's and you just let them go. And then when the yeses come, it's like, hallelujah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. They might get 500 applications, but there's funding for only, say, 30 projects.
Exactly.
Not everyone's going to get in.
Exactly. And maybe you haven't put in your time yet, and I mentioned Rhonda a bit in this episode, but her and I were just talking yesterday that, there was, I won't go into the subject itself, but there was for every no that you get, somebody else gets a yes. And so, if you think about it, that, like, yes, it sucks that you got told no,
right? But
somebody else is really happy because they were told yes. And so
that's a wonderful way to think about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and coming in and speaking with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And do you have any plugs for shows coming up or anything?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm playing at the NCI Jam in Winnipeg on May 13th, which I'm really pumped about. And a fun fact, I won that talent show when I was 12, 13 years old.
Okay, awesome.
So I'm going back as a judge and performer, which I'm really pumped about. And I'm also playing Dauphin Country Fest this year, which is really exciting. So I'm on Thursday, I think it's June 29th, whatever the Thursday is before the long weekend.
And how can people find you on social media and on the internet?
Oh, on the internet machine. I'm on Facebook as Des Dorion, Instagram as Desiree Dorion, Twitter as Desiree Dorion, and I'm even on the TikTok.
TikTok.
As the Desiree Dorion.
Okay, TikTok. I have yet to explore TikTok.
Yeah, it's a beast.
It is. That's what I've heard. That's why I'm afraid. But,
I know. I was afraid for longer than I should have been. But once you get in there and figure it out, it's fine.
I'll need a younger person to guide me around. Well, thank you so much, Desiree, and thank you for watching.
Thank you. This has been fun.